Anna Hammond's here with Unite Ellis podcast, and today I'm talking to my friend Caitlin about what it's like to go into the holidays, maybe when you don't want to, or maybe it's not a great time of year for you. So we're going to talk all about that. We're talking about thriving and flourishing communities, so join us and let's get started. All right, Caitlin, okay, start us off. Tell us kind of what you do now, your history, and kind of go from there.
Sure. So my name is Caitlin Wilkinson. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm the director of behavioral health for Ellis County. So right now what that means is evaluating the behavioral health services that we have in our county and looking for areas of improvement and ways that we can better serve the residents of Ellis County.
Yeah. So where were you at before the county?
Sure. So before the county, I worked for MHMR Tarrant as the I held a lot of different positions there as clinical supervisor, director of clinical services for adult behavioral health, staff development coordinator.
Yeah.
But mostly just helping our case managers learn how to provide clinical intervention and do it well.
Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm. So this is perfect because here we are going into the holidays, and I'm realizing more and more how much this is not the greatest time of year for some.
Yeah.
And so what are some reasons that you've seen so far where it's not the greatest time of year for some?
Yeah, so the holidays are really challenging for a lot of people. We all think about holidays as time that we get to spend with family and friends and loved ones, and. For a lot of people, it is not that pleasant.
Yeah.
It could be because of grief, grieving the loss of a family member, grieving the loss of a job, a relationship, moving, things like that.
Yeah.
A lot of times the holidays are a painful time for people that have lost a family member or loved one because it's their first kind of holiday season without that person in their life. Sometimes it's a reminder of what we've lost. Sometimes it has to do with the weather and the time change. So seasonal affective disorder is very prevalent in the winter months, especially around the holidays when it's darker more frequently.
Okay, let's linger there for a second because now you're making me feel a little bit more normal because I have trees all around my house.
Yeah.
And when the leaves fall and everything goes bare, like I have felt silly because I'm like, oh, this is kind of a downer. And then it's darker earlier. So there is really something to the physical season change. And then vice versa, when it's spring and new growth is coming, you know, so even finding goodness in that time of year seasonally and physically what's around us, I feel like it's kind of important.
It is. And with the lack of daylight, I mean, it really is very much to do with the lack of daylight, the lack of vitamin D. And so a lot of times if somebody struggles with seasonal affective disorder, they start noticing themselves just really pulling away from their lives.
Yeah.
A lot of times a good strategy is to get access to like a UV light of some sort and just do a couple of minutes of UV light therapy every day to kind of get that back, what you lost in the summer months.
So actually increasing your vitamin D. Wow. Okay.
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay. So keep going. You're talking about grief and then the seasonal, the outside changes, the physical change. What else?
Yeah. And then, you know, spending time with family and friends and loved ones kind of brings some additional challenges,
Sometimes
right?
good and bad.
Right. And so we all have that one family member, right?
Yeah.
But holidays can be kind of tough, especially if we don't share the same views, ideologies, political beliefs, things like that with the people that we're spending time with. It can be really stressful.
Yeah.
And just knowing that there could be conflict and knowing that we could be moving into a situation where, you know, I'm going to have this conversation with someone that I don't want to have or things like that. And that can be really challenging.
Right. Yeah. And not to mention just the busyness. The pure busyness of the holidays is no joke. I mean, we have friends, you know, that we know that just, they may have like 7 or 8 holiday activities that they're bouncing between. You know, you throw kids, young kids, any kind of kids, it really, honestly, anything in there. And it is just, I know I've been in that season and it's just making it through. There's no delight in any of it. And it's the logistics of like, you got to get gifts for these people. It's checking a box. Like the entire purpose of why we're even doing all of this is completely gone.
Yeah.
And so the busyness for anyone, I think, is not helping this situation either.
It's not. And you touched on a point too that's a huge stressor in the holiday season, which is the cost of it all.
Oh, yes.
So in addition to grief, in addition to stress, in addition to boundaries and being busy, there's also a massive financial cost for holidays. And that causes a lot of additional stress for people. And sometimes it gets so overwhelming that it kind of feels like there's not much of a way out of that. And causes people to kind of, for lack of a better term, spiral into this stressful situation where we don't really see a way out of the financial stressors of the holidays.
Yeah. The expectation, especially for a parent wanting to make it the best for their kids. I want to lean into that part a little bit more as far as like the mental health side of everything around the holidays, increased suicide rates at this time of year, all of that. And I told this story at County Convene, but just to recap it, growing up, my parents would always find a family that was in great need, and we would, do gifts and put a full Christmas dinner in a basket, and we would go and drop it off at their door, completely anonymously, knock on the door and run. And I always have the vision of, watching them open the door, completely surprised. And so the one year my dad picked out a single mom, 2 kids, really hard time. And we just kept delaying taking it for whatever logistical reasons, and she ended up taking her life. And of course it made us think, wow, if we only had taken it a day earlier, which there's a whole lot of points you could draw out of all of that. But the heaviness of the holidays for her, and then some isolation, she had gotten fired from her job. Like, it was a domino effect of multiple things, the financial trial with the losing the job situation, but I'll never forget it, and I just always remember looking at the basket, just sitting there afterwards, just knowing we won't take it now, and so it's crazy. So what, lean into that part as far as the mental health side of things at the holidays. Like, what are you seeing? What are some of the trends?
Yeah, so we always see a lot more people in crisis in the holidays, a lot more decompensation. And basically what that means is seeing people that are starting to experience more isolation, maybe more depression, possibly seeing an increase in symptoms. Maybe they stop taking their medications and then their depression increases or their anxiety decreases. They might experience more manic episodes, things like that. And so it can be a really challenging time of year for people who have a serious mental illness. And we see a lot more crises at this time of year. There are more calls that go into crisis centers. There are more people that die by suicide during the holidays. And that is, when you think about it from the human perspective, the fact that there is somebody who is hurting so much or struggling so much and experiencing so much and holding so much on their plate that the only way out is to take their own life is distressing. I think it's very important to think about the human aspect of that during the holidays. Everybody gets in that rush, right?
Yes.
And, we're fighting over parking spots and, who gets the last doll in the aisle and things like that. And people say things. The holidays genuinely brings out the worst in people.
Yes. It's so terrible. Okay, side note real quick. This reminds me of literally, I think it was on Christmas Eve several years ago, ran into like Walmart or something, checking out. And I remember this lady completely unloaded on me. And I don't, still to this day, have no idea if I accidentally cut in line. I mean, she was over here. But I remember just being so shocked, but it was like a pressure relief valve just went off in her. And on one hand, it's like, oh, well, obviously, happy holidays to you too. But then on the other hand, it's all that we're talking about of like, this is not just a regular time of year. It's all these other stressors coming on, all in the name of celebrating and supposed to be a completely different time of year than how it actually is sometimes. So it can be really rough.
It is. I used to work in the restaurant industry, and the 2 worst times of year were the Christmas holiday season and Mother's Day. That was when we just got abused so much more than any other time of year.
Wow.
Because of the stressors that come along with it. People tip less, so just,
keep
tip your
it in mind. Yeah.
But, people tip less, their financial strain is a lot more intense. And you're right, there's a pressure valve that goes off and people just...
It's like the final straw.
Absolutely lose it. And sometimes it's outward, right? Sometimes it's that outward expression where you're yelling at an absolute stranger for no reason at all. Or other times it is directed inward, where we then feel that pressure and we turn it on ourselves. So that vehemence, that violence, that aggression that was turned on you could have been turned inward.
Sure.
And so that woman, thankfully, yelled at you, right?
Yeah, maybe that was I'll help her with that day. I don't know.
Absolutely.
Maybe she didn't take it out on someone else.
But that's the part of grace that's so important about this time of year too, is giving grace to the people that are struggling and being mindful of the situations around you.
Absolutely.
And everybody wants to celebrate in their own way, and they want to have their own joy and own experiences and things like that, but we can't forget the humanity of the people around us that are struggling during this time of year.
Yes, for real. Okay, so going back also, so we touched on the financial part. So logistically, here in our county, when we have agencies that get disbursements of funds to help specifically with like rental assistance and utilities. By this time of year, they've literally drained up.
Absolutely.
And so it is a compounding factor. Now, on the other hand, I also would always encourage people want to give more at this time of year, not only your time, but your money. And so it's like give freely to organizations that can help take care of some of these needs. And make sure that it's going to the right place, because it is literally dried up, and it is compounding some of the situations of people getting it this time of year. You've got the family situations going, the mental health situations going, then their bills are hitting, then they literally can't have access to as many resources. And so it's not helpful. But are you seeing other things as far as in the financial side of thing? Is it just more adding to the plate, or?
It's always more adding to the plate. This is such an expensive time of year.
Yes,
and I always, and I don't know, I think this is kind of a hot take, but I always think about the Santa situation and the families that Santa gives extreme gifts. And then, your kids go to school and they're like, Santa brought me a 4-wheeler.
Yes.
And then there's another kid that goes to school and Santa brought them socks. Yeah. Because that's all that Santa could afford to bring them. And even just keeping that in mind, because that pressure is so real for parents. Yeah. It's so intense for parents to try to keep up and try to make sure that their kids don't feel left out. And, we've talked about this a lot kind of from the adult perspective, but the kid side of that, the adolescent side of that is the emotions and the challenges that go on with kids, especially that are school aged, are so different and so much more complex. Things that seem like a non-issue to us as adults are very real and very troubling to children. So when they have parents who travel, when they have parents who can't be with them during the holidays, things like that, there's the guilt for the parents where they feel that guilt that they're not there. And then there's the anxiety and the stress and the depression for the child who is struggling with that too and feels different or less than their peers because of it.
Well, and then you go back to school after the holidays, after spring break, after summer, and everybody's like, where did you go on vacation?
Right.
What big thing did you do over spring break? And we touched on that a little bit in the cost of poverty experience for COPE. I obviously don't think anybody's doing it maliciously or to be hurtful, but it's just not thinking about how it's hitting some of that.
That's true. And a big part of that, and a more conscious way to even have that conversation with kids, is remind them that not everybody has the same life experiences that we do. Not every family looks the same as ours. Not every, person has the same opportunities that we do. And just being mindful of it when we do go talk to our friends about that. And being kind and compassionate about it. Yes. Because we don't have to necessarily change what we do to accommodate others, but we can change how we talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's go back. I don't even know if you finished your list earlier, but because we kind of rabbit trailed some, but I'm going to go back to the beginning of your list with grief. And so that, I think, it's all over, someone has lost a loved one sometime during the year, some recently or whatever. So what are your tips for those in this season, dealing with grief in the holidays and all that topic?
Yeah, so grief is very complex, right? We know that it's not just this linear process where we go through the stages of grief and then we're done, right? It's a very non-linear process. And it's also not just about the loss of a loved one. We're talking about the loss of a family. Yeah. So maybe there's been a recent divorce. Maybe there's been, a family member that you were close to moved away. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's that, in years past, we had family Christmas together, and this year, we're not going to be together.
Yeah,
because even logistically, if your traditions change, that can be really challenging. And the one thing I will say is that anytime someone is struggling during the holidays, there are so many resources available to get them through that. Mm-hmm. And of course, I'm going to shamelessly plug the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, but calling 988, it's 24/7, 365. They know that they experience an uptick in calls during the holidays, so they do have more crisis counselors available to help.
Yeah, that's good.
We can also call the North Texas Behavioral Health Authority's crisis hotline, and they also have crisis counselors on hand 24/7, 365, just to talk people through. And of course, the goal of those conversations is to help de-escalate the crisis in the moment.
Yes.
And if we can't, to get that person connected to the right resources and the right treatment options available to them.
Yeah.
Not everybody needs medication. Some people just need support.
Yeah.
There are tons of grief support groups around the county. There are virtual grief support groups for just about anything.
Oh, that's good.
The loss of a child, the loss of a parent, the loss of a sibling, the loss of a relationship or a job, things like that. There are support groups all over the place for that to reach out to. And frankly, a Google search of job loss support group or, whatever the loss is, there are support groups all over the place for that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is a time of year also, and we've been talking about this at Unite, is just leaning into other people.
Yes.
It does not take, I mean, if people want to go out and volunteer and give money, that's great, do all that, but just stop and look at the people around you.
Yep.
The loneliness and isolation we talk about all the time is a real deal. That relational poverty, like reaching out to people, just checking on them, how are you, I think can make a huge difference.
It does. Even just smiling at the checkout counter when you're at the grocery store, just being kind to people.
Yeah, or it could be the soft response when the person does go off on you or somebody else, and not like escalating it up and just being like, hey, I hope your day gets better kind of thing. So
absolutely.
Okay, so let's get back also to your list that you started with, the family situations. So you have all the gatherings coming up. Maybe you have that cousin or that uncle that is always going to drop the comment or whatever, for whatever reason. Politics, we just had a big election. Religion, you hit all the hot topics of what really can divide people.
All the avoidance topics that come up at family functions.
I mean, I remember even having young kids. Mm-hmm. There was one time that I remember I have little kids, I have 4 kids, and my oldest was 5 or 6, and we're at the family gathering, and he got upset about something, raged out, throws, stomps outside, and our relatives had Christmas lights that went down the driveway, and he just yanked those lights all the way up out of the ground. And of course, for us, we're it was just so stressful. I mean, it's not that big of a deal, but everybody's looking, oh, look at that parenting, why don't you
feel the
get
judgment?
That? Yeah, you just feel so judged. And but it just adds to all of that. So let's talk about your tips for people going into these holidays, boundaries, however to deal with those comments or whatnot.
Family dynamics are tough, especially around the holidays. And I think we all as parents feel judged all the time, whether people are judging us or not.
Yes.
There's every likelihood that no one is thinking anything like that, but we feel it.
Yeah.
And it can be really tough. If it's your own family, you might feel a little bit easier to set firm boundaries, but let's say it's your spouse's family, and that may feel a little bit less comfortable. You might not feel comfortable setting boundaries with them. Or it's your spouse's family you feel very comfortable setting the boundaries with, but your own family, there might be some trauma there, so you don't feel like you can set the boundary. And I think the most important part of this is recognizing the stress before it happens, right? Knowing it's going to happen. Saying to yourself and admitting to yourself, this is a stressful time for me, and I don't like doing this particular situation, so I am going to be anxious about this. I am going to struggle with this.
Yeah.
Giving yourself permission to feel that, and then practicing those boundaries, depending on what it is that you want to set the boundary. Let's say you have that uncle that likes to stir the pot and talk about politics and knows that he's just going to needle you. Set a boundary in your mind of where you're going to speak up, what that limit is, and practice it. And I know that sounds really
good.
silly. And my husband will probably vouch for this. He's like, yeah, she does this all the time. It's super weird. Like, I practice things in the mirror where I'm like, okay, we're not going to talk about this. This is, and I practice my approach and my facial expressions. And
I would
gotta
love
make
to
sure
see
that
this.
It's very
Hey,
awkward.
I'm an out loud talker too, so I have no
it's
room
emotionally
to talk.
processing, but my face says a lot of things that my mouth doesn't. So I gotta practice the
Yes.
facial expressions. It can be stressful, but
so
recognizing that that's even an issue, right?
Yeah.
So practice those boundaries.
Yeah.
Decide what's appropriate to say and what's not appropriate to say. Decide what might be hurtful if it comes out of your mouth, and make sure you practice a way around the hurtful words.
Yeah.
So that way you are prepared. And then with your partner, your spouse, your friend, whoever it is that you're attending this event with, have an agreement.
Yeah.
Have an opportunity for, a code word or, a certain whistle or a caca. That's like our exit strategy, right? But that just says, I need a timeout. I need a break. Let's go take a walk.
Yeah,
or
come
let's take a
interfere or help me exit this conversation.
Absolutely.
It's
Give me an exit.
That won't be obvious at all.
Mine's always donkey. If I randomly say
Really?
donkey, I'm like, I want to change the subject immediately and move on.
Really? And you just randomly say the word donkey?
Yeah.
So
if
that
we're
right
ever in
there
a
will
conversation and I say donkey, just know
I'll
that
be
I
like,
want to change the topic.
We're going to change it, yeah. I think the other thing is learning to say no, and meaning, again, going, especially if you have any split families, divorced families, and maybe you have multiple, you're still going to the extended family here, and then the grandparents of this, and then on both sides, and on this side, and all that. I mean, you can, so sometimes we may not be able to make it all.
Right.
But also, I remember specifically feeling the stress around as the grandkid level grew in number. So things that you started when you first have one grandkid in the family, everybody, they're going to get a stocking. And I'm talking like extended family. Like grandparents we're going to buy a stocking, and then everybody's going to get the grandkid something. And all the sibling level, like brother, sister-in-laws, brother-in-laws, whatever, we're all going to buy stuff. And then you keep adding to the family. And now it's a ridiculous amount.
Massive.
And having to transition at some point where I had to be the awkward one to be like, so are we going to keep doing this? Like, are we still buying each other gifts? Because I feel like you're stressed to buy for my 4 kids and you have 1 kid. You know what I'm saying? Like, having to reassess that every now and then, because if not, it is just, it adds to everything we already talked about, you know, and it's okay to maybe change it up a little.
It is. My family, between my family and my husband's family, I've been very fortunate that everybody's kind of on the same page with that, where we're like, we're not buying adult things anymore.
No, at some point you got to say, no, we're not doing that.
We usually buy the grandparents something,
yes, exactly.
and then,
That's how
and
we
then
do
it's
it
about
too.
the kids, because as adults, we have everything that we need, or, we're capable of providing that or whatever. And so we try to eliminate that financial stress for each other, because there's a lot of grandkids on both sides of our family. And it can get really stressful, especially when, like you said, when you start with 1 or 2 and you're like, I can indulge.
We keep having kids and kids.
Well, and kids then compare.
And you got to keep it all balanced. It's this whole thing, But even on the extended side, I remember when we went to drawing names. So instead of buying for 10 grandkids or even great grandkids at whatever level you're at, then it's like, hey, let all the grandkids buy or draw names, and you could buy 1 gift. Like that, it's just logistically so much easier. Financially, logistically, everything, you know?
There are free apps that do that. My family did that for a while too, before we just decided to stop giving adults gifts.
Draw?
Yeah.
To draw names?
There are apps for that. It's called drawnames.com, I think, where everybody enrolls, and
I love that.
That's
a really good idea.
Sometimes people will bring gifts that could be mildly inappropriate depending on the person who's receiving them. And it's always well intended, but they may bring like a bottle of wine or their favorite beverage with them to a family gathering. And that can be really tough because not everybody drinks. For some people, it's a choice. For other people, it's a necessity to not drink. And so remembering that the people around you might be struggling with their sobriety is really important.
That's a good point.
And it's so socially acceptable to drink. It's readily available and socially acceptable, which is absolutely fine. But be cognizant of the people around you that don't drink, and maybe consider why they don't drink.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. We definitely want to honor people's decisions in that. So, and going back to how it can be a hard time if they're turning to any kind of substance or whatnot to cope with all of that. That's a whole That's a whole thing.
Absolutely.
So.
Well, it all plays in together because maybe the person bringing the wine is the person who probably shouldn't.
Right.
And so being aware of how we have those conversations with our family members and loved ones too, because we don't want to alienate someone, but we also don't want to enable. And it's a really fine line.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Okay, so as we wrap up, any other last comments, thoughts, suggestions as we go into the holidays to keep the main thing, to keep a check on our boundaries? We've talked about making sure we reach out to others, keep an eye on people that might be struggling. What else? What other things have we missed?
You know, there was something that you said earlier, and it made me think of my former clinical supervisor, Scott. And he always told me, because I'm very bad at this, but no is a full sentence. And it's acceptable for that to just be your answer is no. I'm like, no, thank you, probably.
Yeah, maybe it'd be nice, but it's okay.
But no is a full sentence. And so it's okay to say, you know what, I can't do that. I cannot handle that this year. I can't do that this year. I can't accommodate that this year. But also just knowing where to reach out. It's a really tough time of year.
Yes.
There are plenty of therapists and social workers and counselors and crisis lines that people can reach out to. Absolutely. And so there are a lot of resources available.
Yeah.
If you don't know where to reach out, call me and ask. I'm more than happy to help get people connected to the appropriate resources.
I love that. So, and just to end on that note, within the Unite Ellis network, just so people are aware, we have a mental health team that meets monthly, and Caitlin, along with 2 others, are our champions in that area. So even if someone doesn't know where to reach out to Unite. We can plug you into that network.
Yes.
Amazing people. The local church, if that's your thing, or even just local support in general of wherever you're at in your journey of whatever, there is someone there to support you. So thanks so much for coming on today. I've enjoyed sharing our coffee.
Yes.
And we will be back next time. Thanks for joining us.